and entertain the children there. And we didn't entertain them with handcuffs or anything like that. All we used was balloon animals and small toys and stuff like that. But we also did parades. And in the summertime, like on 4th of July, I used to be in 4 parades in one day. I've always told people when I got into clown makeup, I regressed into childhood. It was fun being a clown because you could be yourself or just let yourself go and act a fool. You could be slapstick and funny and have a good time.
In the bustling city of Chicago, there were many people who came and went, hoping to make a life for themselves. But in the quiet suburb of Norwood Park, a deadly secret was hidden away in one particular house. A house owned by a man named John Wayne Gacy. On the surface, Gacy was a successful businessman, a loving father, and even a community entertainer who dressed up as Pogo the Clown for children's birthday parties. But behind closed doors, Gacy's life was far from normal. He was living a double life, concealing a dark and twisted side that would eventually make him one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. To understand Gacy, we must go back to his early years. Born on March 17, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, Gacy had a rough childhood. His father was an alcoholic who often beat him and belittled him, calling him weak and worthless. Young John Wayne Gacy desperately wanted his father's approval, but he faced constant ridicule and abuse. These experiences shaped him in ways no one could have predicted at the time. As he grew older, Gacy struggled to find acceptance and a place in the world. He dropped out of high school and moved away to start a new life. Despite his early troubles, Gacy managed to find some stability. He got married and had 2 children, working various jobs to support his family. But there was something in Gacy's mind that he couldn't escape, a darkness that would soon consume him. In 1968, Gacy's darker side surfaced. He was charged with sexually assaulting 2 teenage boys who had been lured in by promises of work and other incentives. Gacy was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 10 years in prison. His wife divorced him, taking their children and leaving him to face the consequences alone. But surprisingly, Gacy didn't serve his full sentence. After only 18 months, he was released for good behavior. The system had given him a second chance, but this chance would prove disastrous. After his release, Gacy returned to Chicago and tried to rebuild his life. He started a construction business, which quickly became successful. He remarried, bought a house in Norwood Park, and seemed to be a reformed man. He even became active in local politics, joining the JCs, a community organization where he was well-liked. People in the community saw him as a hard-working, friendly neighbor. To many, Gacy was a perfect citizen. He threw neighborhood parties, performed as Pogo the Clown at events, and was often seen laughing and joking with others. But his neighbors had no idea about his past, or the horrors that would soon be uncovered beneath his house. It all started with a few young men who went missing in the area. Most of them were runaways or young men looking for work. Gacy often hired young men for his construction business, and he had a habit of offering them drinks, money, or work to lure them to his house. He would charm them, joke with them, and make them feel at ease. But once they entered his home, everything changed. Gacy would use a cruel trick to subdue his victims. He called it a magic trick. He would handcuff them under the guise of performing a fun prank, saying he was simply showing them a trick. But as soon as they were restrained, Gacy would reveal his true nature. He would torment his victims, and they would never leave his house again.
Knots in general. Catch his sense of humor.
Shoelaces, huh? You're in trouble now. Aren't you afraid sitting that close to me? What the hell? Oh, this is too long. All right, you don't need it this long. Okay. I had a rosary, which I carried in my pocket. I've always carried a rosary. It was my communion rosary. They said, well, what kind of a knot do you use? I said, what do you mean knot? When I tie things up? I says, depending on what I'm using it for, I said, the only thing I ever learned from Boy Scouts is a tourniquet knot. He said, well, show us what that is. So I took, at that time, and again, it was together, but in order to demonstrate it here, I took the rosary and I said, well, here, you put it around. It's hard trying to do this. Why don't you put your hand out? Okay, here. What I told him, I said, here, all you do is you wrap it around, you put one knot in it. And I said, then you put a second knot in it. Okay? I said, then you take a stick and stick it in here, and you just turn this. And I said, because it's a tourniquet. I said, that's the only knot I ever learned.
Precisely the kind of knot found on the ropes wrapped around the necks of the victims found under the house on Summerdale.
By the late 1970s, the disappearances were becoming too frequent to ignore. Family members and friends of the missing boys were frantic, desperate for answers. Many of the boys were last seen near Gacy's home or his business. However, because many were young men who moved around frequently, it took time for police to connect the cases. Gacy's seemingly normal life made him an unlikely suspect. But everything changed in December 1978, when 15-year-old Robert Piest went missing. He had been working at a pharmacy and was last seen speaking to Gacy about a potential job. Robert's mother reported his disappearance immediately, and the police started to focus on Gacy as a suspect. Police began surveillance on Gacy's house, watching his movements and gathering evidence. During this time, Gacy acted erratically. He seemed to know he was being watched and even invited officers into his home at one point. But the officers noticed something disturbing, a foul smell coming from his basement. After collecting enough evidence, the police obtained a search warrant for Gacy's home. What they found inside shocked even the most experienced officers. As they entered his crawl space, they made a horrifying discovery: human remains buried under his house. The scale of Gacy's crimes became apparent, and the police began a painstaking process of uncovering body after body. In total, 29 bodies were found buried under Gacy's house, each one a young man or teenage boy. Many of them had been reported missing for months, even years. The smell, the horror, and the sheer scale of the crime scene made it clear that this was the work of a true monster. Authorities soon realized that Gacy had killed 33 young men in total, with some bodies discarded in the nearby Des Plaines River when he ran out of space under his house. Gacy's arrest led to a full confession, where he chillingly recounted details of his murders. He explained his methods, showing no remorse for his actions. His ability to recall details of each murder shocked investigators, who were faced with the horrifying reality of Gacy's crimes. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Gacy showed little emotion. He even tried to blame others for his crimes, insisting he wasn't entirely responsible. It was clear that Gacy was a disturbed individual who had completely detached himself from his monstrous acts. Gacy's trial was one of the most infamous in American history. The defense attempted to argue that Gacy was insane, hoping to spare him from the death penalty. But the prosecution presented a strong case, detailing each murder and presenting evidence of Gacy's meticulous planning. The jury was horrified by the evidence and by Gacy's lack of remorse. After only 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Gacy guilty of all 33 murders. He was sentenced to death, a sentence that was met with relief from the families of his victims and from the public. While on death row, Gacy continued to shock the public. He took up painting, often depicting clowns, an eerie reminder of his Pogo the Clown persona. He even tried to sell his artwork, causing outrage among the families of his victims. Despite his conviction, Gacy showed little remorse, even giving interviews where he downplayed his crimes and blamed others. In May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection. Outside the prison, crowds gathered to celebrate the end of a life that had brought so much pain and horror. But even in death, Gacy's story left a lasting mark. His crimes changed the way law enforcement handled missing persons cases, particularly cases involving young men. Families across America became more vigilant, and the psychological profiling of serial killers gained new importance. Gacy's story became a cautionary tale of the evil that can hide behind a friendly face. The story of John Wayne Gacy remains one of the darkest in American history. He was a man who lived a double life, hiding his horrific crimes behind a mask of normalcy and charm. His actions left scars on countless families and haunted a nation. Even today, the name John Wayne Gacy sends chills down the spine, reminding us that sometimes evil can hide in plain sight.
People don't want to know the truth and the honesty of it. If they want to be convinced or brainwashed into what they believe, then fine, then go ahead and kill me. But vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, because you will have executed somebody that didn't commit the crime. When they paint the image that I was this monster who picked up like these altar boys along the street and swatted them like flies, I said, this is ludicrous. I've taken 3.5 hours of truth serum, and under sodium amytal, the maximum amount that I could have, it shows that I have no knowledge of the crime whatsoever. Never have had. Loving and caring. I've always looked after my children, even now.
What kind of values do you remember imparting to them?
The kind of values?
Were you strict with them too?
No, not as strict as, no. A lot of things that my dad did, I refused to do, because I don't believe in hitting children. I don't believe in spoiling a child either. My values are such that if you give enough love to the children.
You're accused of murdering 33 kids, and you say you didn't believe in hitting. I mean,
well, anybody that knows, you see, first of all, you're basing this garbage on what you've heard of me.
what happened to what happened in the Vukovic case? Where was he picked up, and how did he get to the house, and what happened with him?
I don't want to go into the other the 5 that I know about. Just take it that I didn't. Vukovic is not one that I killed, so I don't know nothing about him. The little bit that I know about him is that he was an employee of mine. See, when you look about this recall business, and
I'm not a prosecutor, John, but you just
I know
said
you're not.
Vukovic
Wait a minute.
is not one that you killed, which suggests that maybe in fact there were others that you did kill. No, not.
Okay, I'm sorry if I led you to believe. No, strike it then. That is wrong. If you want to charge me with anything, charge me with complicity in 2 of the murders.
Just 2?
That's all I know about. Robert Peace was killed by another individual in my home.
How did he get to your home?
He was transported to the house by another.
How did the other, whoever he was, kill Robert Peace?
I believe he was strangled.
You were there, right?
Not during the crime, but I was there afterwards, and I watched the removal of the body.
And what happened to the body afterwards? Was one that was that
It
body was put into the river?
It was taken to the river and dumped in the river.
Did you help do that?
Yes, I'm in complicity with that. I've always contended. Don't look at me as an innocent babe of the woods. In regards to going out into the garage, yes, I know I went to the house, and yes, I know I walked in the garage, and they asked me where the last section of concrete was poured. Okay. I said, there's the last section where the last section of concrete was poured. Okay. They are the ones that took the orange can of paint and said, here, put a mark there, so I put an X there.
So the paint was not to identify the place of burial?
No. No, it never was. They asked shoelaces, huh? You're in trouble now.
Yeah, right.
Aren't you afraid sitting that close to me? What the hell? Oh, this is too long. You don't need it this long. Okay. I had a rosary, which I carried in my pocket. I've always carried a rosary. It was my communion rosary. They said, well, what kind of a knot do you use? I said, what do you mean knot? When I tie things up? I says, depending on what I'm using it for, I said, the only thing I ever learned from Boy Scouts is a tourniquet knot. He said, well, show us what that is. So I took, at that time, and again, it's together, but in order to demonstrate it here, I took the rosary and I said, well, here, you put it around. This is hard trying to do this. Why don't you put your hand out? Okay, here. What I told him, I said, here, all you do is you wrap it around, you put one knot in it. And I said, then you put a second knot in it. Okay? I said, then you take a stick and stick it in here, and you just turn this. And I said, it causes a tourniquet. I said, that's the only knot I ever learned. To me, clowning it was a way of relaxation for me. You regressed into childhood, you were able to relax, and you could be goofy if you wanted to, and still you had the facade of your face being covered. I used to do clowning, and I don't know if you want to mention the name, for an ice cream company in Chicago, who had 33 flavors. I used to, I'm serious, Bressler Ice Cream Company. I was their contractor, and I was also their clown. And Pogo the Clown was the clowning that I did for charity hospital work for the Democratic Party and that. And Pogo the Clown is originally. Pogo comes from being Polish and on the go all the time, so it's Pogo. I always felt that service community and community service to others, you know, in my religious background, I felt if you serve other people, it'll come back to serve you. You know, I've always believed that way with generosity.
What's your life like?
Day to day, I live it day to day.
What do you mean?
If you want to know what my life is like, I log it every day. For the last 12 years, all you got to do is ask. I can tell you everything. I can tell you the first meal they served me here because I do it daily.
What do you do all day?
Every phone call, everything that I do, every time an officer's around me is logged. Every movement that I make is in the book here. You know, when I tell you I've got background information on it, we took each one of them by, we took each one of the victims, and this is by their names or by their indictment numbers. And what we did with each one of them, we did profile sheets on them. We wanted to know what this kid was into, what his background was. My dad was domineering in fact. He had a different set of values, but also very stern individual. My dad drank a lot. When he drank a lot, yeah, he was abusive to my mother and to me, but I never swung at my dad because I loved him for what he stood for.
Why the skeleton?
This was done by request. Somebody requested a skull clown, and mostly the punk rockers and the undergrounders like that stuff there. This is Christ as I see him in myself. And it's monolithic because Christ to me is monolithic. He's all things to all people. This here is the Hi-Ho series, and that is self-explanatory. It's a Seven Dwarfs, and they've always stuck to me as a great child painting. And so I've done a series of Hi-Ho series paintings. And this is the 1990 one. This is called Hi-Ho Around the Campfire. It's an original work. Walt Disney is a mentor for me because I've always enjoyed his creativity. And the Seven Dwarfs, if you actually look at all the faces, they represent the 7 different moods that most people can get into. And nowadays, do you realize by 1993 that 50% of the American families will be single-parented? And that shows a breakdown in the church and not being able to hold families together. And for this reason, children run away from home and seek love in other places. What do I think of Jeffrey Dahmer? I don't know the man personally, but I'll tell you this, that's a good example as to why insanity doesn't belong in the courtroom. Because if Jeffrey Dahmer doesn't meet the requirements for insanity, then I'd hate like hell to run into the guy that does.
Do you feel
Beyond that, I have no comment on Jeffrey Dahmer because I'm not Jeffrey Dahmer. And I would not, whether it's Berkowitz, whether it's Bundy, whether it's Williams, Wayne Williams down in Atlanta, or any of the others, or Charlie Manson. See, I don't comment about other cases for the simple fact is that I wasn't there.
Do you feel somewhat of a kinship with some of these people?
God, I hate that when they put me in the same club with them. I'm not only the victim here. I may be the 34th victim, but there are other victims to this crime, and that is the family. Because if I know that I didn't commit the crime, then I have been given the injustice, and so has the families. And nobody gives a damn about the families. That one mother that gets on television all the time who thinks I should be given 33 injections, I think she ought to take 33 Valiums and go lay down. She goes on Geraldo's show and all these other shows talking about, I think it's Maori, I think is the name. Her Marine son. Her Marine son, if her Marine son was so great, what the hell did he run away from home 12 times?
It's not enough for him to be murdered.
I know that. There's a misconception of what the house on Summerdale is. It's not a house where you work 9 to 5 and come home and it's like a house where you live in. The living room was the private office section. One of the bedrooms was a terrarium. The kitchen was more like a fast food kitchen. We have always contended there's others involved. At the time of my arrest, there was 4 other suspects. 3 of the suspects that we knew that they knew then was Michael Rossi, David Cram, and Philip Paskey. All employees of PDM contractors, all with keys to the house on Summerdale. I met him the night he was killed because I met him with Michael Rossi. I had a drink with the 2 of them, and then I left. And when I next seen the individual, he was dead.
Where did you see
Why
him?
didn't I say something about it? Because it wasn't my business, and I say it out of other people's business.
Where did you see him dead?
In the house on Summerdale.
And did Rossi tell you who had killed him?
No, Rossi didn't say nothing. Rossi was sleeping on the couch. I just left.
And how did he get buried? Do you know?
He was buried in the crawl space. When I come back, he wasn't there. So, Walter, that's your guess as to who put him in the ground and that. No, I started back in 1984. I started taking 10 milligram of Valium, and by the time 1978 came around, I was doing 130 milligram of Valium. But then I was moving 80 jobs a year, and I was working 16, 18-hour days, and I just had to have something to take the pressure off. When I was arrested, they claimed, well, there was a putrefied odor in the house. And I contend that was a lot of hogwash too, because one Officer Schultz claims on the 18th or on the 19th that as he came into the house, we had come into the house and my little Lhasa Apso was in the house. And of course he had been locked in the kitchen, you know, all day. Well, the little puppy, he piddles, see, and while he's piddling and while he is doing his business on the paper and that, you can imagine what it smells like if you go into a closed room. And when the heat came on, as soon as the heat came on, it'd give you, you know, that strong feces odor. You know, I found it as odd when we bought the house that a house with a crawl space would need a sump pump. But then I learned the first time it rained that this ground gets wet under there, and the crawl space actually floods up to a foot deep in water. And then as it recedes, it puts out a musty odor. There was always a musty odor in that house.
Oh.
I'm just as lovable and jokeable as I was back then. You know, I don't sit around worrying about the death penalty or things like that, no.
How could you not?
If you believe you've lived your life the right way, then you do not have nothing to fear, in my case.
You're not worried about facing God?
No. I'm fairly comfortable with him. I've been at the Catholic services. I'm the server for the priest for the last 10 years. I have no qualms about doing that. I've had confession, I have communion. And I am at peace with myself.